I'm going to explain the Jarvis HPS portable stunner, how to disassemble it and put it back together. To start with, before you disassemble, make sure that you have the air tank disconnected. And then just for safety, we'll pull this pin here and we'll put it in the supply trigger just to make sure. To start with, I like to remove this bolt back here. So we'll go ahead and take it out. Okay, then once you have that one out, we'll go ahead and remove these on the back of the gun. So once we have all those loose, we'll go ahead and take them all out. And they're all the same bolts. And then to remove the top section, just bring it down and give it a light tap, and the whole will come out as a unit. So go ahead and just slide off the nose piece. And as you're taking it off, look down inside there and make sure there's an O-ring that is in there. This is the cushion which stops the rod. Make sure that it is in good shape and doesn't have any big nicks or anything in it. Slide it back down there. And then we have the stunning rod, which is held in the cot position. But if you go ahead and just turn this a little bit, you can slide the top part of the gun off, and then you can push this down to release the stunning rod. We'll set that aside for right now. We'll go ahead and slide this catch piston out and set it aside, and then that will allow us to remove all of the catches. So that is the top end of the gun. And then we can go ahead and remove the handle from the main housing. I'll go ahead and slide the main housing off and remove those screws. Okay, now to get to the valve, there's two valves in here, one on the top and one on the bottom. But there's a little quad ring that goes on top to seal that. And then if you pull the trigger, the valve will pop up. Usually it'll pop up enough to where you can get your fingers in there. If not, if you slide the trigger forward, and then I just use my Allen wrench and put it inside and then press the valve up so you can get your fingers on it and take the valve out. Now to get to the bottom valve, we need to remove the regulator. I'll remove these 4 bolts that hold the regulator clamp on. Now we have the regulator removed, and then we'll go ahead and remove the other half of the regulator bracket. And again, this valve is the same way as the other one. There's an O-ring on the top. You can remove that O-ring. And then if you stick your Allen wrench underneath the trigger, you can pop the valve up on this one too. And remove that valve. So this, now that we have the gun disassembled to all of its components, we'll go ahead and reassemble it and check everything as we go. It reassembles in the reverse order, but I always like to check and make sure that both your triggers are free and move freely on their own. So to start with the reassembly, I'll check the valve, the supply valve. I'll make sure the O-rings, both the O-rings on the outside are in good shape. And this is just sold as a cartridge. If you're having any problems with it leaking or anything, just replace the whole thing. But when you put this in, make sure that you have the pin. There's a little pivot pin that holds this ball in. Make sure that it is at 90 degrees to the handle. And just slip that in, push it in, and you'll feel the trigger come out. And then go ahead and put that quad ring back on top. Once you have that in there, we'll go ahead and put the regulator bracket and just inspect and make sure that there's a little hole right here, and that's where the supply air comes in from the regulator. Make sure that it's free and clear. And slide this on top of the gun, and then tighten these back down. And I'm not going to show torquing everything, but we have just a little torque wrench. It's 5 Newton meters, what the bolt manufacturer recommends, but just tighten them all down. But when you put this regulator bracket on, make sure that it's even on this, on both edges, so that you can get these bolts down in when you put the regulator on. But we will go ahead and check the regulator for any debris. Looks like there's a piece of Teflon tape inside that one. So go ahead and then inspect the O-ring on the regulator. And if you need to replace it, I'll just use a little bit of grease and just put a few dabs on there to hold it. Because that O-ring is on a curved surface, it does kind of need a little bit of extra help to stay in there. So we'll go ahead and grease that a little bit. And then we will reassemble it. Now you'll notice there's notches in the side of the O-ring. They will only allow it to go, or side of the regulator, only allow it to go in one way. If you try putting it in backwards, the bolts won't be able to go down because it needs those notches for clearance. So go ahead and get that lined up. And then we'll slide our regulator cap on. And there's 2 different lengths of bolts. The shorter ones go in the back set of holes, and then your longer ones go in the front set. Go ahead and tighten those down and torque them. Now I like to, while I'm tightening these, I just run the bolts down until they're just touching, because you don't want to tighten one ahead of time, because since this cap is split in two pieces, if you tighten one ahead of time, you can cock it at an angle. So I'll just, like I said, just run them down so they're touching, and then tighten them all down evenly to try to keep the cap, to keep your gap even all the way around. So once you have the regulator bolted back on, we will go ahead and move up to the fire valve. Same with it, inspect the O-rings. If the O-rings are still good, then go ahead and replace it. And it slides in the same way. I like to keep there's a little pin in there for this roller. Keep it perpendicular to the gun. So I'll slide that in, push it down, then you should feel it hit the trigger. Reinstall the O-ring on the top of there, and then inspect the O-ring on that passage there, and then go ahead and we'll put the housing back on. We'll put the 4 bolts back in the housing. Then go ahead and tighten those down and torque them. Next, we will move on to putting the whole catch assembly and everything back together. There are some O-rings in here you'll want to inspect. There's an O-ring down inside here. Inspect that for any nicks. You can use like a little hook tool to pop it out and look at it. And there's also an O-ring here and out here. Inspect them for any damage. If everything looks good, go ahead and proceed. I like to there's a groove inside here where the catches sit. I like to put a little bit of grease inside there. And then I'll insert the catches one at a time. And that grease just helps hold them so they don't fall out. And you put the 2 of them in there, and then the last one, you kind of have to go in at an angle and then pivot it in. And then I usually use my Allen wrench and make sure that they're all seated back in there. And then you'll take your catch piston and inspect the O-ring. And if everything looks good on the O-ring there, we'll go ahead and reinsert it, making sure that it slides through the catches, and then press it in all the way. And then we'll take our catch cylinder, and there are 2 O-rings inside there. You'll want to inspect them and make sure that there's no nicks in there, and you might need to take them out and actually look at them and replace if they need it. And then we'll just slide that on top and push it in. So once we have this together, we'll go ahead and take the rod and push it on there so it's locked on, and we'll inspect the O-ring on the rod, make sure that it looks good. And we've already inspected the O-ring, the cushion down in there, and the O-ring here, and we'll slide those back together. And then there is there's an O-ring, which is the same O-ring as this right here, that we use as another cushion that goes down inside the housing. So once you have all that, we'll go ahead and slide it all together and push it together. And then we'll reinsert all of our bolts on the top. And then I just run these down, just run them down so they're close, but not actually starting to tighten yet, just to line everything up. And once you have all those ran down, but so they're not touching, we'll go ahead and put this bolt in the back from the handle into there. I want to make sure that, I usually always make sure I put this one in and tighten this one first to make sure that, because there's two O-rings on the back of this piece, if you put this one in first and tighten it, it will make sure that this piece lines up with the handle and is sealed. Then tighten it, and then finish tightening those other 7 bolts on the top. Okay, once you have everything tightened up and torqued down, the gun is assembled and ready to be to set the pressure on it. So to set the pressure, we have on the regulator, you'll hook up your CO2 tank and then adjust the pressure. We'll put our pressure gauge here, and then you'll start turning this in until you get your desired high pressure that you want. Once you have your high pressure set, remove this screw and put it in the topmost hole. So we'll put it in there. And go ahead and screw it in all the way. And then we'll take our collar, which is loose, and we'll put it on the front edge of that screw so you will not be able to tighten it up or to adjust the pressure any higher. And then we will tighten up the collar. So now that you have the collar tightened, you cannot turn the pressure up any higher than what you just have it set there, but you can adjust it down. With just one screw in here, you can adjust it from your high pressure setting wherever you have it, and then it will go down 75 psi. Or if you need to, you can adjust it, put a second screw in so you'll have your high pressure setting, and then you can have a second low pressure stop point of less than 75. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to switch out from a CO2 tank with the regulator adapter to just a compressed air adapter. Some facilities, if you're not going to be using a CO2 tank, you don't need the portability. You can put this bracket on and you can just run it off straight air. It eliminates a lot of components that might give you troubles in the future. So to do this, make sure you have the tank removed. But go ahead and we'll remove the regulator. So to remove the regulator, we'll go ahead and remove the regulator cap. Okay, once you have those loosened, going to take the cap off, take the regulator off, and then we will go ahead and remove the last 2 bolts on the regulator bracket. Okay, so once you have all that removed, since you're here, go ahead and inspect the seal. If everything looks good, we can go ahead and put this on. We're going to reuse the back 2 bolts. So you'll slip that on. And tighten them down. And then we will reuse the longer 2. And they will go in the front. And go ahead and torque those down. Then you will put in your air fitting that you need to connect to your air hose. By removing this, if you know that you're going to be using strictly just compressed air, this eliminates some extra seals and valving, just makes it more trouble-free. And that's how you switch from the CO2 regulator and brackets to just a compressed air bracket.